So good morning, everyone. And let's see, how do jazz people with projects connect with you? Let's start with you.
A number of ways. I'm used to getting contact from artists, from managers, from labels. So I'm one of those folks who is okay corresponding with the public and kind of see that as an integral part of my job, fielding requests, fielding correspondence, asking how one can get airplay on WBGO. I should make a little disclaimer that I'm not from the programming department, so there is a mandate for programming in terms of how to go about programming each individual show. And within that, there's still a pretty large framework for each host to be pretty creative in the type of programming that they present on their show. So I work in tandem with programming, but the things that I say will be from my perspective, and I can explain a bit about how programming goes about programming the sound of the station, but each individual has the liberty to program the show the way they want them.
Okay, so this is going to be the first round. We'll just get you very basics. Evan, talk a little bit about your responsibilities at JazzTimes, please.
Well, as far as the signing goes, I learn about artists in every which way, through CD submissions that are unsolicited sometimes, through publicists, through labels, just old-fashioned hanging out at clubs, which is, I think still the best way to learn about great artists. JazzTimes is a very small framework for people doing it, so I do the signing, I edit a lot of copy, I have tremendous help from Jeff DeMarkin, who I'm sure a lot of you know. It's very direct. There's not a lot of bureaucracy there. Any way you can think to get the music to me, I'll accept it in that way.
And Michael?
How's everybody doing this morning? That's great. I could say ditto. Definitely I always encourage folks to reach out and touch the folks that you're trying to get your music to. Don't hesitate. If I don't have it, I can't play it. But I do encounter music, as you heard, oftentimes it's sent to me directly. Oftentimes I may be hanging out. I teach a music journalism class at the University of the Arts, and all the students are musicians. They graduate, they create music, they send me their music. It comes to me in a lot of different ways. Today I handed everybody on the panel a CD from an artist whose music I happen to enjoy. And I said, hey, I'm going to hand it out. So, find whatever activist or whatever individual out there that may believe in what you do and enlist them to support what you do. But it comes to me in a lot of different ways. People approach me, while I'm on the air, they call up. I get calls from all over the world, and people want to send the music. So it comes a lot of different ways.
And thank you. And Hank, how is your approach?
Let's see. I get a lot of I guess I would definitely echo a lot of what was said. Music comes to me in a lot of different ways. Certainly a lot of packages with CDs. Artists will send me a download or something like that, or publicists reaching out, labels reaching out. Sometimes it's the venues themselves. And I think it's really I think it's a very difficult thing to stay on top of, all the stuff that comes in. I think that, you make an effort to really give everything a fair look. I think it's hard to do that. I think that you're obviously gonna, favor things from, you turn over a CD and you recognize some names, or you recognize a label name, or you recognize, that something about it might appeal to your tastes, and I think that's something that I try to be pretty transparent about. Is I think each person who covers music or broadcasts music or whatever does have, they do have their own tastes, and I think it's, when I get a submission from someone where it's clear that they've sort of maybe read some stuff that I've written and might, be sending something to me because they think that it aligns with my taste, rather than just blanketing music that's coming at you sort of randomly. I definitely appreciate that, and might be more inclined to, give that more of my
That's a
time.
good pitch lesson. Know the publication you're pitching.
Yeah.
Be familiar with it. Be familiar with the departments, some of the personnel.
Yeah, I mean, because I think when stuff comes in kind of indiscriminately, and you'll open a package and you'll be like, is there any particular reason that I can't think of any particular reason that this was sent to me other than someone's got their just have a mailing list or something and they're sending out indiscriminately. I think that that's something actually I've been thinking about a lot. The mailing out of CDs. I mean, I don't know how other people. I'd be curious to know how you guys feel about that. I personally have been thinking a lot about how I don't really want the CDs. I kind of would rather someone just to give the option of a download, a nice description, and a sample, a way to stream it online. But I think the physical media is maybe more important for
Well,
you want to.
Before we get into that, I think you really hit, Hank, on the crux of what this is about, this panel, which is how do they engage with you specifically? And that goes for all four of you here. We all have limits on the amount of stuff that we can cover, limits on the amount of stuff we can even listen to. So how does an artist who does not have a reputation really reach you? What is it that you're looking for, you personally? And how do you work that into the responsibilities that you have for your platforms? Monifa?
I think what Hank hit on, knowing the person that you're pitching makes a big difference because it lends a level of credibility. So if someone knows that I'm into hard bop, or they know I'm a big Jackie McLean fan or whatever, and they're one of his disciples, went to art school in music, or we're doing his repertoire, that's just an example. And as a publicist, pitching people, I know how important it is and how journalists also tend to get a little kind of pissed off sometimes if you approach them with something that is not in their domain, something that they would never cover, something that doesn't even fit the format. So you have to show that there's a certain amount of intelligence in the way that you're going about pitching, that you understand the outlet that you're pitching, and that it's really a viable outlet for you to even come to someone with. So I think knowing your audience and approaching them intelligently in a way that shows that you connect with what they do and what you do has some kind of relevance to the programming makes a big difference.
So in this case, you're using the term audience to mean us, not the audience that you're broadcasting to.
Well, both. I mean, the audience that you're broadcasting to, understanding what the type of music we play on WBGO, and it is broad because we represent a broad spectrum of the music, but also each individual host, as I mentioned, really does have a different sound within the unifying force of the station. So knowing, if you're a cabaret singer who covers jazz standards, knowing to go to Michael Bourne is the right person. Like I was saying, hard bop, straight ahead, my tag is swing hard and take no prisoners. And by that I mean hard hitting, hard driving music that's pure and driving. And so that's kind of the type of music that I like. So coming to me with something like that. And then you were talking about whether you're getting downloads or hard copies. I mean, I find it easier if I'm getting a hard CD to listen to rather than I get tons of emails from people who are like, here's a download to my new album, and no information about them. And if I've never heard of the artist and there's no track listing, there's no information about what their background is or what their history is as an artist, I might not be so compelled to click on that download link from a stranger with no information that has any relevance to me. So I prefer a hard copy with a bio, maybe quotes from relevant people who are validating who this musician is, or press that substantiates what it is they're doing.
Evan, you have the largest bucket to have to parse through, and yet you're making monthly assignments in all of the departments of JazzTimes. So, what is your process?
Well, I prefer the hard copy as well because, we're just inundated with material with new records. So it has to be as systemic as possible when we assign these things. So, like everyone was saying, downloading is a thing now, and we get solicitations for that all the time. It's another level of something for me to process. So the hard copy is still what I listen to all day. I got the stack here, I got the changes. They go in, as I'm working on other things, something catches my ear. Now, I would like to point out that, with the label system kind of There's still a lot of terrific labels, but the labels don't control the industry anymore. So, there's this plateau of importance or seeming importance. So it becomes the idea of how does the cream rise to the top? One thing that I've noticed is that I look for side people. Sort of, I was joking with the critic the other day, I call it sort of the Billy Hart theory of coverage. If I have a stack this big, if Billy Hart's on your record, I'll probably listen to it. So that to me is becoming a way to sort of discern things. And the other idea is just if you're out there playing a lot, if I see you build Smalls and see you build here and there, that can only benefit you.
So that's the idea that there is somebody who's on track in a career that you want to be watching, whether it's to your personal taste or not, but you're assuming that they're going to keep working and they can become, you need to have them on your radar.
Yeah, exactly. Or it's just time investment too. I know that if there's certain people on a record, even if I don't maybe even know the leader, I'm going to enjoy parts of it. So.
Yeah, I've been telling people now if they want to send me this, if they need to send me an hour to go with it.
I don't want to, the idea of like young working bands. I try to process as many of those too. So I don't want to say that, if you've got this amazing quartet, don't break that up and just try and pay some famous guy to be on your record. I'm not saying that at all. But, that road is going to be a little more difficult for you to get a lot of attention. Unless I happen to, like this tremendous band at the walking distance. That's an example of some young guys that I didn't know. You just kind of stumbled onto them in Jazz and Colors, and I can't wait to see what they put out. So, yeah.
So that's by going out and actually
exactly.
engaging yourself. Mike, do you have responsibilities to your Philadelphia audience and your Philadelphia artistry that, sort of has some leverage on your choices?
Yeah, well, it definitely plays a part. I want to, I guess, try to provide a opportunity for the jazz community in Philadelphia to, if they can't get heard in Philadelphia, where can they get heard? So we definitely are trying to extend opportunities to the musicians in Philadelphia, of course not exclusively, but there is, I guess because of that proximity, the show that I do is very eclectic, so it's crossing genre in many respects. It's under the umbrella of jazz, but it's called the bridge between bebop and hip hop. So it's a very eclectic program. So I cover a lot of artists coming from a lot of different directions in the Philadelphia area. But definitely, I do reach out to artists. Again, just going back to the CD that I handed these folks tonight, this young lady is someone that I saw, on a local Philadelphia television program. And the reason I noticed her in the beginning was because I noticed the guitarist that was playing with her. And I was looking at him like, well, if she's with him, then she's probably very serious about the music. And that's how that relationship got started. It happens a lot of different ways, but there's definitely a connection. Venues in Philadelphia are coming to me all the time. Hey, we've got this artist coming through. Can you set up an interview? Can you do something with it? So there's definitely that rapport. Again, the artists in Philadelphia, I'm running into them. Whether it's the Kimmel Center, whether it's the Painted Bride Art Center, whether it's the Man Music Center, whether it's Chris's Jazz Cafe. I'm constantly running into folks. And of course, when you run into folks and they know you're involved with radio, they're going to slip you a CD. But I'm always listening to music as well. Coming into Penn Station, I'm listening to the escalator and I'm hearing a rhythm on the escalator. That's kind of nice. So I'm constantly, whether it's in the car, whether it's at home, I'm constantly listening to music. And
front load your records too.
And oftentimes it may be that lesser known artist that I may skim through and see if something grabs me, something reaches out to me. So I'm coming from a lot of different angles, in making that decision.
Hank, in some ways I think you have, at least at TimeOut New York, the smallest bucket. You have the least space to cover like all the activities. How do you make those decisions?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I definitely have to think about jazz as just a piece of the pie. There's so much, I mean, yeah, in TimeOut New York, when we're making a section each week, it's got to kind of be like a cross-section of everything that's happening. And there aren't going to be, you know, if there's 3 pieces in there, that two of them aren't going to be jazz, and maybe one of them isn't going to be jazz. It's kind of like, you have to look out for it. And some of the other freelance stuff I do, you know, do some writing for Pitchfork and other places like that. And like, you know, in those cases, like, you kind of have to think about like what is the jazz thing that's you're gonna be able to like somehow pitch or frame in a way that like the non-jazz person is gonna have any interest in it. And I think that's like, you know, like I guess I think about something like this Gerald Cleaver album, the Black Host album from last year, which I really liked and I wrote about. Like, with that, you know, it was one of these things where it's like, it was a record that I felt like anyone who's interested in like, I don't even know what I would call it, I guess some sort of general avant-garde that kind of spans like indie rock or jazz, or it just felt like a record that like had a larger reach, and it wasn't just one of these records, it was very like in the jazz box. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with a record that's in the jazz box. I listen to a lot of that stuff and think it's great, but a record like that is going to be harder for me to like pitch in a you know, I don't write for a lot of jazz specific publications. I have in the past, but I think now there's a little bit of it's a question of like, how can I make someone care about this that might not necessarily be like a jazz person in the way that, you know, I am or some of my friends are. You know, it's kind of like, why should the larger public care about this, I guess?
You make decisions about things that you like, you may put that on your blog as opposed to seeing that it's not really appropriate for TimeOut New York or Public.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like something on the blog would just be like, you know, that's just. I try to keep that very spontaneous. I think I've definitely had some people like sort of pitch me writing on the blog or something like that, but I keep that as just a place where I don't have to worry about, I mean, for one thing, I kind of like not having to worry about timeliness. Like if I'm interested in some record from the 60s that I happen to be fixated on that week, then I'm just gonna sit there and talk about it. I think it's a very liberating feeling sometimes not to have to worry about like everything being so, okay, the record comes out this week and the show's this week, and like sometimes stuff works like that, you'll get it in advance and you'll be very into something at the right time, but sometimes maybe something, oh, this is something from 10 years ago that happens to be on my iPod this week and I want to talk about that too. So I like to kind of move between the really timely stuff and the stuff that it's just completely my own whim.
Monifa?
Yeah.
I just wanted to add, Hank touched on something that I think is really important. It's building the story. That a lot of times, sometimes it's the story behind the music that makes it compelling enough for someone to listen to it. So if you do have an album that really tells a story that conveys something that's important in your life or important with what's going on in the world, but that tells a story, sometimes it's a story that carries the music, and getting that message across is the thing that might tip the scale to get someone to listen to what it is you're sending them or pitching.
Well,
so I think the story is.
You know, I think that brings up a really interesting point. Now, I'm sure that everybody in this room is going to be hearing this. You've got to have a story, you've got to have a story, you've got to have a story all for the next 2 days. It's become really a mantra, you know, for if you don't have a story, how can we storytellers tell it? But what can we tell the musicians who are not, you know, writers necessarily, are not intrinsically storytellers? How can we help them to focus in on what their story is? It's the distillation of their music. How can we help them do that? Because it's really our responsibility to make the story succeed. When I get a piece of work, music to listen to, I begin to spin out stories. Well, is this work? Is this, you know, who's the, what, where, when? But I don't think that most musicians are as narratively obsessed as I am. So what would you tell them about giving story factors to you?
I think there's such a wide variety of artists. I think I really, you know, obviously there's people like Ethan Iverson or something who's proven to be so articulate in talking about himself and talking about music in general that that's almost someone who exists like outside of the need for a journalist or a writer, because there's such a compelling voice as a writer on their own, and I think some artists really gravitate towards that. I think there's some other artists who don't really have this kind of like, they don't put themselves out there in that way. I mean, I think about somebody like Craig Taborn or something like that, who was, I think, a guy kind of like flying, for a long time, just kind of flying under the radar. Just basically his voice was that he was making amazing music with a lot of different people, but he wasn't the kind of guy that you necessarily read a lot of interviews with, or coming out there and like telling you his opinion on a lot of things. And I think both are really valuable. I don't think that Craig Taborn should have necessarily like started a blog or something, because maybe that just wasn't his, that wasn't him. And for Ethan Iverson, obviously he wanted to talk in addition to playing. And I think that each artist, I think that like, I don't think someone should force themselves into a position of that verbal place if that's not really their nature or something.
Right, well, I mean, not to hit on Ethan, because, Ethan's blog is about a lot of things about music, but it's not really, he's not telling stories about his music necessarily. And I'm only talking about the kind of story that somebody tells you in their cover letter with their CD. I mean, as it happens, I wrote the first liner notes for Craig Taborn for his very first record at DIW. And, it struck me, well, this is somebody whose music is really fantastic. And he's been working with James Carter. I want to tell a little bit of his background, Detroit story, but it's really sort of introducing him, and my voice in the liner notes endorsing his music and trying to pick out specific things that I thought the listener, might find interesting. That was sort of how I wove that story together. But again, having that sort of perspective and self-reflection on your own work, I think is something that's difficult for anybody. Evan, what would you tell people to help them to focus on the kind of pitch they're giving you about what they're putting in your ears?
Well, it's sort of like I'm reminded of a quote by the late great Mulgrew Miller, which he was talking about interview music, which is, highly conceptual projects that are especially in vogue now, I think, as opposed to just cats who can play, cats who write original music, and just kill standards and, do their 50-hour long club set. And that's how they live, and that's fantastic. At JazzTimes, I always want to balance between real human interest stories and, hey, these are some cats that you really need to know about. So, there should be some, concept-y stuff, as well as, these are the people I played with. These are just the vital stats. Like Tabor is an example of somebody who, you hear him play, automatically want to know about him. Now, he's a really interesting guy because he has so many influences. He's sort of a heavy metal aficionado. That would be something to put in a cover letter.
He's sort of what?
A heavy metal aficionado. He's into electronic music. So that's something that I would pay attention to. The idea that he's playing this terrific piano trio, but then he also has these influences that are coming from these kind of outside places.
Michael, I want to ask you, maybe this is a little bit moving away from what we were just talking about, but do you think that there's any conflict of interest in any sort of commercial way when you take up an artist whose work as appeals to you, and then you're trying to present it, say to those of us who are here on the panel? You're working an inside game there. I assume that you're not getting paid, or at least...
Yes, I am getting paid. No. But I'm an advocate. I'm a fan. I'm passionate about music. Whether I'm involved with radio or not, I'm going to listen to music. I'm going to be an advocate, and I'm going to support artists in any way that I can, whether I'm involved with radio, the industry, in any way that I can. I've been working, when I say working, not getting paid, but working with a relatively new entity in Philadelphia for the past year, the Philadelphia Jazz Project. And, you know, the focus of the Philadelphia Jazz Project is to promote jazz in Philadelphia, the artists primarily. And that has given me the opportunity to really meet a whole lot of artists that I haven't had a chance to meet. You know, I was mentioning a little earlier that we've been doing listening parties in Philadelphia for jazz musicians. You know, no performance involved, a free event, provide some light snacks, some beverages, and try to get to Philadelphia, because it's about igniting the audience. You know, there's so many other things that someone could be doing as opposed to checking out jazz music. There's so many options. So how do we ignite the jazz community? How do we continue to cultivate and develop the jazz community? So we've been doing these listening parties. Maybe 4 artists are, you know, the features for those evenings. We play a few selections from their CD. The only thing that an audience member might spend money on that evening would be the purchase of a CD. So the artist wins, the audience wins. So, you know, whenever I have the opportunity to promote artists, that's what I try to do. You know, so on the radio show, I mean, that's essentially what I'm doing. You know, last Friday night I had Ronnie Barrage playing live in the studio. You know, I aired a conversation with Stanley Clark. Stanley Clark is performing in Philadelphia this weekend.
So, you know, I think that we are all advocates, pretty much we've adopted that pose, but what about our gatekeeper status saying no? You know, how do we deal with that, and how do you decide, you know, this is not, it's not only not for me, but it's really something that it's not ready yet, or something along those lines? Evan, you look like you're responding to that.
You know, there's limited space and there's limited time, and we obviously cannot cover everything. We can't cover even, you know, a really large percentage of what we receive. So, you know, we do our best. My advice would be just to try and keep goodwill and you know, don't burn a bridge unless you feel you have to. But, you know, just because we don't get it this time doesn't mean we're not going to get it later. You know, you're not going to get a major feature every 2 years or something. So you got to, you know, like I just said, you know, we try to do as much as we can, and, you know, we'll hit you now, and, you know, we won't hit you later. Maybe if we're going to pass on this record for a feature, the next one will be better, or the next one will have, you know, more time and space. So, yeah, we try to accommodate as much as possible.
Does that institutional memory just exist in your head, or is there some sort of protocol at JazzTimes where this has come in and this is what I think about it, and like maybe Jeff could refer to that in a month or something like, or 6 months or something?
No, I mean, it mostly exists in the editorial head.
Which is capacious.
Yeah.
And communicative, yes.
You know, just sort of, you know, keep doing what you do, and, you know, if the music is happening, then eventually peace will happen.
Monifa, I see. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
What we were saying before about the concepts, right? I just had this idea that sometimes, and I keep seeing more of this lately, it seems, you know, if you're grasping too hard for that human interest angle, that can actually backfire on you, I think. Sometimes you just, you know, hey, I can play, check this out. You know, that if there's nothing else there, then there's kind of nothing else there. I got this is an example of kind of what I'm talking about. I got a press release, and the press release was about Nathan East, and it's a Daft Punk's favorite bass player. It's like, okay, that's cool, but, you know, to jazz people and to people who've, you know, followed his work, I mean, that just seems like a cheap angle. So you want to avoid that sort of thing.
And on the other hand, you thought it was a good idea for Craig Taborn to let you know that he's into heavy metal. So, I mean, this is a taste issue.
No, but it's also knowing your audience too. I mean, Daft Punk's favorite player, that might work for, you know, a daily newspaper where Nathan East is playing in town, and you have to go to a pop writer where there's going to be some relevance. Oh, I know Daft Punk, let me check it out. But in this case, for JazzTimes, it doesn't really carry as much weight as it might in that.
Well, and Tabor more because all those strains come out in the music in the end. And you know, it's kind of part of his whole, and it's very organic narrative there.
Are there gatekeepers that you folks have to navigate your way through? People at the level above you, where you have to be able to pitch the story to them in a convincing way? Michael?
I kind of live in two worlds. Friday night with the bridge, wide open. You know, I produce it, I direct it, anything goes. But I also been filling in for the past year and a half. It's supposed to be about 3 months. On Monday and Tuesday night, which is a little bit more structured, you know, I'm playing essentially what the programming director, you know, has, you know, generated a playlist. And, you know, I'm keeping things flowing with what's preset in that realm. So when I'm there on a Monday and Tuesday night, I'm doing essentially what WRTI wants me to do. If I do an interview on a Monday or Tuesday night, it's probably coming from the top down. They're asking me to do it. Sometimes, you know, an artist may reach out to me directly, but I pass it through them on Monday and Tuesday night. If it's a Friday night, there's not that interaction. So it's really two completely different things that happen on Monday and Tuesday night versus Friday night.
What about you, Monifa?
I came up at WRTI where I was used to using line selector, where there was a programmed set of music. And at WBGO, it's different. I mentioned earlier that we have music director Gary Walker and our VP of content, Josh Jackson, and together, who's actually in the room, and they actually come up with a unifying sound of the station. Now I have a template that I have to work within, which basically has certain categories. I'm gonna play a certain amount of new releases an hour. I'm gonna play a classic artist, I'm gonna play something recurrent, something vintage. You know, a framework that's a unifying force so that, which is based on audience research that we've gotten over, you know, the past 3+ decades that works for us, and that's validated through member and feedback, you know, the fund drives, the membership campaigns that we have. But with this framework, I still feel like there's a lot of latitude for you to really come up with an identifiable sound for your show and to program a show that fits. You know, if a regular host is not on the air and someone's filling in, I can typically tell when they're not there, because each DJ really does have their own sound. So working within that framework, and I have to follow this framework, I still have a lot of freedom to come up with the sound for my show.
Hank, do you have to work with Steve Smith about what's going to go into TimeOut New York, or somebody else?
Yeah, sure. I mean, he and I will have a dialogue about it, and I think we both have the sense. I mean, TimeOut is a very special case because it's a really like a service-oriented magazine, and we're really trying to provide just the best mix, and that goes for not just the music section, but for all the other sections. It's just like, you know, we've got the hip-hop thing, and how can we balance out that with the rock thing, or the jazz thing, or whatever. I mean, but, you know, in terms of, I think you were saying something about the gatekeepers, like, above. I mean, I definitely have that experience a lot about trying to pitch, like, sort of non-jazz publications on a jazz release. And that, I think that becomes this sort of, like, tricky thing, where it's like, I may land, like, 2 of those a year or something, but I'm always trying to think about, you know, is there something about this that I, you know, and that Daft Punk thing sort of resonated because it's like, I think, you know, the way you were framing it was like, it's almost like a cheap thing to throw out. And then you were saying that...
Well, it's an example of why you should hone your pitches in a little more, too.
Yeah, yeah, I mean...
That might work for a major metro daily.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're talking, we hear you, right?
You guys hear me?
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
So yeah, for a major metro daily, that might work. You know, for a hardcore jazz magazine, probably not, because we know too much about this particular artist.
Yeah, I think that I'm often in a position, and I think something I said before, like, it's often that position of like, I have to put myself in, like, it's like I care because I'm interested in jazz, and I consume a lot of the stuff just like as a fan, you know, like you were saying, but like I have to put myself in a position of like someone who because I mean I think the issue that we're all aware of is that like there's a larger segment of the public that's they're just not really, they don't keep up with jazz, you know, and I think that's, you know, everyone kind of knows that, and it's not, you know, there's certain conversations that jazz isn't a part of, and I'm often trying to find ways to like, how do I speak to someone in that sphere, like respectfully, understanding what they do, but then also being like, here's this record that is a jazz record that people need to know about. You know, it has some kind of larger significance, and I often do have to like, it's like I'm pitching, I have to find what that angle is. You know, why should someone care who's not at Smalls every night, or, you know, so you kind of have to have like a dual citizenship.
Do you think that the power of we gatekeepers has diminished a lot with the openness of the web? Are people just, you know, able to put their opinions on Facebook or tweet something, and that's as good as we who have exalted platforms, presumably broadcasting the information and making our recommendations? Has the web had an enormous impact on us as gatekeepers?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think like I was talking about before, like these, you know, the artists being part of the conversation, which is, you know, and I guess I should say as an aside that, you know, I think you're kind of being facetious and saying like exalted and things like that. I don't really like to think about, you know, I like to think about it all as just a conversation, and, you know, if my voice is in there, great, you know, but you know, people are constantly sending me links to things on Facebook where will be like writers talking with artists, and everyone's just sort of a part of a larger thing. I think that's fascinating. I think that's great. I don't think there should be a thing of like, you know, it's like, okay, well, this is what I happen to do for a living or with my time, and maybe I have some expertise, but I you know, you want to hear what everyone has to say, you know, and I think that any platform that opens that up and where everybody can sort of talk, whether it's, you know, I think a fan's opinion is just as important as a critic's opinion, you know, and I don't think there's a whole lot, at least to say for myself, that like qualifies me to do this other than just loving music and sort of being addicted to it and constantly wanting to check it out. So I want to hear, you know, what everyone has to say.
Well, Evan, what do you have to say about that? To some extent, JazzTimes and Downbeat and maybe Jazz Is and the New York City Jazz Record are considered authoritative and biblical, iconic, and they have to be. I mean, that's our market power. What do you think, Evan?
Kind of a religious figure. You know, you're basically trying to create monoculture out of a culture, you know, monoculture doesn't exist anymore, right? You know, we have 50 million television channels, we have the internet, we have, you know, Spotify, and all these technologies coming in at the same time. Now, that's great because it allows everyone to do whatever they want to do, produce their own records and all this stuff. But it's a little dangerous because it's like, you know, how do you know what's really important? How do we have this shared collective experience that makes this stuff so important in the first place? So, you know, for JazzTimes, it's a kind of honoring a core group of artists who we know that our readers are going to want to know about. You know, your Koreas, your Schofields, Matheny, that kind of thing. You know, we're America's Jazz Magazine, so there's a certain you know, core group of artists that we feel like we need to cover. After that, then we start, you know, plucking things that we particularly like that catch our ear. So it's a balance. You know, it's a stylistic balance. It's a balance of the hierarchy of artists, you know, who are playing amphitheaters and tiny clubs. It's a mix of all of that, and you just try to do the best you can as far as, you know, weighing one against the other.
Let me ask if there are particular platforms that Monifa and Mike, let's start with you guys, pay attention to in order to be introduced, find material that you have not known before. For instance, I mean, I've been very impressed with Treme over the several seasons, and it's got me listening to WWOZ, you know, having that app on. Now that's outside of Philadelphia or Newark, but, you know, does that perk your interest, something like Treme or?
Yeah, I watch Treme in large part because of the artists that are featured on there consistently. You know, I talk to a lot of folks in New Orleans who tell me they don't necessarily like Treme. And they give me specific reasons on why they don't like it, but I enjoy the artists that are featured on Treme. So I watch, you know, in part for that. I've been on WWOZ. So I've had a connection with OZ. Jeff Duperon from our station comes from OZ. So I, have a rapport. But yeah, definitely, again, I mean, my ear is always open. So wherever it's emanating from, whether I'm flicking channels and, there's something on PBS that, spikes my interest. Whether I'm, in a restaurant and I hear something playing in the background and, it piques my interest, wherever it's coming from, I'm open to it. Whether, somebody hands me a CD or not, I'm going to probably listen to it. That doesn't mean it's going to get played on the air, but I'm going to probably give them a listen. How significant that listen will be, tough to determine. If it catches me, I'm going to go for it. If someone tells me, hey, if, Monifa says, hey, while you're up here, try to check this out. I'm going to listen to it. I may not have a chance to check it out, but I may Google it later. So as I said, I'm like the gym rat. I'm very passionate. I'm very open. I'm always, interested in finding something that, I think, it's kind of for me as a radio person, when I play something on the air, if you have to stop in your driveway and you cannot get out of your car, okay, that type of moment, if you're driving and you have to pull over, people call me up and say, listen, I can't go to sleep because of what you're playing. All right, that's, so, I'm always open to that next thing, that's going to come down the road like that, no matter where it's coming from.
Monifa, is there a secret source that you go to discover something new, and different, or several of them?
I don't think there's really a secret source, but I think just as we're asking the musicians and publicists or whomever to be responsible and educated in how they're pitching us, that we have a responsibility, each one of us here, to inform ourselves with everything that's going on the scene to the best of our ability. And I just wanted to share this J.J. Johnson quote. He says, jazz listeners can't be fooled. They're broad-minded enough to want to hear something innovative. At the same time, they're too hip to be taken in by false prophets. Not only do they love their music, but they know it too. And I feel like being an on-air host, that is the WBGO audience. Don't play something, an alternate take that was lesser than the main track. Don't announce the wrong personnel. I mean, you really have to know your stuff, and you have a responsibility to present it in the best way possible. So, I mean, in talking about, social media, I feel like in the past decade, social media has changed the way that I do my show. And I love interfacing with the audience. When I'm on the air, I'm Facebooking and I'm tweeting at the same time. I'm fielding requests, talking about the music with people who are corresponding me, and that has become an integral part of the way that I do my show. I have a template of how I do it, but it changes in the spirit of jazz. Sometimes, from a conversation with someone I'm interfacing with, or I'm reminded of another recording by someone else, it might change in that moment. So that interaction, that human interaction, I actually relish and see as an important part of what I do. But there are regular sites like Jazz Corner or iRock or All About Jazz and Jazz Is and JazzTimes and Downbeat, all the Billboard, all of the relevant places. But I love to check out what other artists are talking about too. Like I love reading George Colligan's interviews. I love checking out what Nicholas Payton is blogging about, and I like to hear what BJR is talking about. There's a lot going on, and trying to be engaged on that on a multitude of levels is important. And I feel like the social networking aspect of it has really changed the way that we broadcast, and certainly the way that I approach doing my show.
Maybe some of these artists are becoming gatekeepers themselves. I'm going to start taking questions. I'm going to ask my friend Don Palmer to manage the microphone. If you've got a question, please line up behind the microphone.
Yes, my name is Vince, and my question for all of you is, because I'm traveling all over the world for jazz festivals that mostly don't have much jazz in them, what is your definition, each of you, of what jazz is? You all keep saying you're services audience, and I'm only hearing a fraction of what jazz is in the world, what I'm accustomed to, because I'm a jazz influenced artist as opposed to a 1962 remake of the jazz.
Well, here, I'm done. Well, of course, you all have specific areas in which you're most interested in But how do you want to respond to that?
Jazz has a number of traditions within it. So it could be the avant-garde. I think there's a jazz rock fusion tradition. There is, just great straight-ahead swinging jazz. There is vocal jazz. I mean, these are all things that jazz people enjoy, and we, cater to the jazz audience. And we try to be as balanced about that as possible. As far as the festival thing, yeah, I mean, that's nothing new. I do get a lot of people sending me straight blues records and straight R&B records, and a lot of world music. We don't have as much room to cover that sort of thing. That was more in the 90s and early 2000s. There was more of that in JazzTimes. Now we're more dedicated to sort of the hardcore jazz scene. Within that, I say the jazz scene, but within that there's a world of music.
Michael?
That's Vinx, V-I-N-X. You may not remember, but 10 years ago you were on my radio program. Okay. Jazz is life. I mean, it's for me, it's life. It comes from a lot of different places. Yeah, I mean, we can try to put certain parameters on it. If it's not swinging, it's not jazz, what have you. But, in simple terms, for me, it's life, and it comes from a lot of different places. So, if you have a new CD, we can talk afterwards.
The biggest problem I have now is sort of jazz artists who are absolutely proven jazz artists, who have all the credibility in the world, doing really non-jazz projects, and whether or not we can cover those. I reviewed Robert Glasper's last record, which is fabulous, but I think, Mike, the opening line was something like, "This is strange, it's a really high-profile release by a high-profile jazz artist. I'm not sure it belongs in this magazine." But jazz people are interested in what Robert Glasper's up to, so we put it in there. The same problem arises with people like Bill Frisell and things like that. But, these are artists who have followings within the jazz community, so we will serve the jazz community, and we will cover them.
Monifa, do you cover people who are,
What's that?
You give no room for jazz to grow. If you're only thinking traditional. The jazz then would not play the same thing they played then.
Why didn't?
We're including all other musics
Well,
in our jazz sensibility.
yeah, but there's plenty of room for jazz to grow, within itself.
Just don't play it.
Things like people like Jason Moran, obviously they're pulling from all corners of influence. But no, I mean, if you hear an R&B record, the R&B record. If I hear like a straight hard blues record, I know what that sounds like, and I'm not going to put that in at the expense of somebody else who is working within jazz rock or something else that is using what's come in the past and building on that in some sort of contemporary way that's interesting.
perhaps we should work on publications that are non-jazz oriented to see if they'll incorporate a little more music that's along our lines than worry about extending our platforms to incorporate things that are sort of on the edge.
Howard.
Don,
Question.
sir, next question, sir.
Oh, hello, I'm Brian Charette. I have a question for the panel. I write to many of the people. Should I ever call? Should I only write emails? How much should I do it? Because I'm trying to be sensitive to not do it too much, but I try to keep people in the loop with what I do. How should I manage that? Do you ever like to take phone calls from people or only emails?
Hank?
I found that I've picked up the phone less and less over the years, to be honest. It's not, I mean, it's nothing, I don't think it's anything personal, but yeah, I think emails are good, and I think, follow up without, within a reasonable amount of time is fine too, emails.
Monifa? Do you take phone calls?
I take phone calls, but emails are probably best. Emails are probably best.
I do take phone calls, but email is also best.
Mike?
Yeah, if you call me, I'm going to talk to you. I don't have a whole lot of time because, as Monifa knows, you're scrambling, trying to stay ahead of the game, in the studio. And so I will probably ask you to email me, follow up with me. But yes, you can call me. I won't ain't gonna lie.
So if I email twice a month, once every 2 months, is that too much? How often should I contact people?
I guess it depends what you're emailing about.
Albums, a release, or important concert?
I email these guys every day.
Yeah. I mean,
Well, everybody does, and we don't want to offend you guys.
I don't feel like, personally, I mean, I get as much of this stuff as I think all of us do. And if I'm not responding, it means I'm really not gonna respond, you know? And if you keep sending me repeated notes about somebody, I just don't have enough range to cover everyone that I'm getting.
Amen.
So I like being reminded, I don't, you know, that doesn't bother me. And phone calls, you really play a game with whether I'm gonna be nasty or not because what I'm doing that moment. So you know, sometimes somebody calls me and I end up talking to them for 45 minutes because I'm sitting around twiddling my thumbs or something. But if I'm in the middle of like a sentence and struggling with an adverb, it's like, sorry, later.
The other side of my life is as a publicist, so I will never be nasty.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jay Hunter, and I'm a writer for All About Jazz, and also for Neighbortown, which is an arts blog in upstate New York. And I also host a radio show called Jazz 2K, which focuses on new releases and music that's been recorded in the 21st century. Just a quick thing, this has been a fabulous panel. I've been getting, you know, great stuff that I've learned, and also a lot of stuff that I agree with, as far as especially knowing who you're talking to. Even though I write for online, I also have a radio show, so I need hard copy, plus all my triage listing is in my car, which does not have an MP3 capability, so give me the hard copy. I wanted to ask about something that Evan brought up, which is the Billy Hart effect, which I agree with. If there's somebody who's...
That's copyrighted now.
Oh, I know, yeah. Trademark. But if there is somebody on there that, you know, rings a bell like that, especially for a young artist, I'm going to check it out. But I wanted to ask about something I've noticed, which is that I will get product that will have a Billy Hart or a Mike Moreno or whatever, but he's only on one track, and he's on track 6, and yet on the cover he or she is promoted as like one of the major players of the band. And if I have to wade through 6 tracks to get to Billy Hart, and everything that's come before is meh, I'm gonna basically feel like this is a shuck, and I'm gonna jettison it. And I was wondering if you guys have the same feeling about that.
Yeah, absolutely. But sort of what I was saying before was, you know, if you have a stack this tall and you just see Billy Hart, you're going to pull that out. Now,
Right.
You know, what you're saying comes later in the listening process, and yeah, it does go against them.
Okay, let's keep moving. Thank you, Jay.
Neil Weiss, Whaling City Sound, small label. In different ways, you're both the targets, the radio people targets of radio promoters, and Monifa, I guess you're on both sides of this, but the writers targets of PR people. Can you talk briefly about being the audience for those people and what the people who are good at those jobs do well, and what kinds of things really get you upset? I guess he just touched on one, maybe. But what kind of things, the do's and don'ts for people who are trying to reach you with their message, you know, as professionals, not the artists themselves. Thank you.
And
I think, you know, like we were talking about before, just sort of knowing who you're pitching and not feeling like you're just getting some blanket thing, but something that's actually personalized to your publication or to the things that you've previously written about. I think too, just like really basic stuff like ease of availability of materials. I mean, this is just it's just something that comes to mind because I deal with it every week, but photos are a really big deal in TimeOut, like high-res photos, and just like having a really clear repository of that where it's just like you can send someone a link and just get all your publicity needs here or something. I think also like, you know, making the music available online. If you have a place where someone can just stream it very conveniently so they know before they want to download or something. Just kind of like a very like all-purpose availability of any materials that people might need. Obviously, print has its own idiosyncratic things, but you know, yeah, I don't know. I think just knowing who you're pitching, knowing what that person needs, you know, just general politeness. You know, sometimes publicists will get a little bit more like pushy with you or something like that. I think that's just everyone's personality. I think I always would prefer if it not get to that place, but maybe sometimes that does help to get my attention or something like that. You know, I think it's a tough thing.
Evan, you have something to add? I'm sorry, you.
Yeah, there's a couple schools of PR. I've been doing this since 2006, and it seems like there's the, you know, trained telemarketer, which is how many times can I call you? I don't know anything about this record, but someone told me to just bother you until you get it. I don't like that. And there's the other thing, which is, you know, they're on the scene, they know the music, they know the artist, they know who's on the record, and they're absolutely helpful. And, you know, pitching is one thing. Seeing a piece through it is another thing. You know, can you get me photos? Hey, I have an archival photo request. Hey, can you get me the secondary quote for this guy? Being there through the whole process is really important.
Monifa, we've only got a couple more minutes, so let's talk really fast.
I'm just gonna say quickly, presentation. I mean, like everything in life, sometimes you have one time to make the first impression. So if you're sending a package, you want it to look good. You want to have, I mean, for radio, I can't stand when we get music and there's not even time codes on it. You don't even know how long a track is, or one track leads into the next, or the, you know, the material that comes with it is so disheveled. So I think presentation is really important. Get it right.
Mike, do you have
the first
anything to add, or could
You know, again, just echoing, doing your research, know who you're reaching out to, you know, try to be direct and specific.
Sir.
Yeah, my name is Torben Waldorf. I release music with Artist Chair, and I've got 4 CDs out there. Of those 4, JazzTimes has picked up all 4 of them, and if you look at Downbeat, they picked up 1 of them of that. So I was wondering about like editorial profiling, how to like develop, get further in that, you know, the difference between where JazzTimes is and where Downbeat is, and how you kind of get through that thing.
Well, I like your playing, so that's the most important thing. As far as why Downbeat covered 1, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with you. I've enjoyed the work, so it's getting reviewed. There's not a lot of smoke and mirrors there. I mean, it's just, I listen to it. It's good. It got in the mag.
As a sometimes representative Downbeat, I will say that they think that having their Midwestern perspective makes a big difference, and they're somewhat suspicious sometimes of things that I recommend to them to cover. Since I'm based in New York, and I've only worked at Downbeat since 1974. So, you know, it's pretty clear that they would be worried about what I have to say, but it really is a coin toss. There's no way of figuring out how to do that. If you're getting consistent reviews other places, then, you know, you should get the publication that you've targeted, that you want they should know that you're getting consistent reviews other places, because they will eventually catch up. You know? Thank you. Sir, next.
Thank you. My name is Cameron Mizell. I had a question for Evan. You said, you know, with social media and Facebook and whatever, you know, how do we know what's important? So I'm curious, like on a personal level, for each of you, kind of what do you feel is important? Like what qualifies something as something that's being important enough to talk about, maybe in the context of your own profession and what you do, but also just, you know, socially or in what's important for music in general, jazz or otherwise?
I guess I'll start.
Okay.
Visibility is really important. You know, I can think something's good, but I like the idea that a lot of other people are talking about it, and that there's momentum behind something. There's certain artists that, even if the record's good, I kind of only keep hearing about them from them. You know, if there's a little bit of word of mouth there, and especially if they're getting booked, I mean, you know, you cannot mess with a live setting. If you're getting club bookings and people are coming out to see you, if I walk into a room and the place is packed, then yes, that can only help you.
Monifa, do you have anything about that?
No, I think buzz factor is important, and any type of validation like that, whether it's from another well-respected artist who's creating a buzz about you, or just hype that's going on in media. You know, just building of critical mass definitely helps.
Thank
Yeah, I definitely think like seeing that trajectory and seeing like, I don't know, I guess for some, I don't really know why, but for some reason like someone like John or Rabagon comes to mind, just someone like, I feel like, you know, start seeing their name and then you start, I don't know what it is, like there's an intangible place where you start to realize that this person is someone you need to keep an eye on if you have your eye on this type of music, and their profiles are sort of building and building, they're playing with, you know, more respected people or something like that. I don't know, it is kind of intangible, like what's important. I guess it's very case by case.
Mike, I think for you, maybe what's most important is whether it sounds good.
That plays a significant role. You know, that plays a significant role. And, you know, again, if it's somebody that, you know, maybe you feel you can do something to help push them along, you know, I definitely want to, you know, play that role. But definitely for me, ultimately is the product. You know, the product, that's the bottom line.
One more question.
Last question. Okay, quick, please.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Philip Moya. We released something last year. I think that's all about jazz. But quick question is, when you have a pile of CDs, how much of your decision to pick one or the other is influenced by how it looks, by, you know, whether one is, you know, you have a, you know, sleeve and doesn't call your attention at all, you know, you might just, you know. And the other is whether you guys pick up on trends. Like if you see that this big artist you haven't heard of, but it's got social media following, and you might, you know, because I see that as a trend happening in other journalists in other areas, but I don't know if jazz is picking up on that.
In terms of the big pile of CDs thing, I guess part of it is this Billy Howard thing you keep talking about. I mean, like a recognizable name is always, I guess, something that just by nature you'll gravitate towards. Another very superficial thing is I noticed that when they send the slim CDs that just get thrown in a pile that you can't just look at on the side, they're hard to like call up again. So when it has the case with the spine, and this is, by the way, after I've said that I don't want really CDs sent to me, but I'm just saying, if there is a pile of CDs, then having a spine where I can just reference it might help. You know?
I think the label system produced a lot of great cover art, and it still is. Self-produced CDs, just because the resources are fewer, that cover art tends to be less striking. I always think it's better to err on the side of understatement with cover art, as opposed to really, you know, going for the gold and you know, doing something, you know, extremely esoteric or you know, some kind of strange glamour shot photo. You know, there's a lot of poor choices in self-produced cover art, and it's a shame because it does sort of go against you. Whereas, you know, a really simple cover would have worked better, I think.
I almost bought an Ice-T record because of the woman on the cover. Almost. But I think, you know, it can catch your attention. But, you know, I will look at the names on that record, you know, as well. And that, you know, plays a part. That's part of the cover art. If there's no names on it, then, you know, maybe I'm a little less, you know, susceptible to checking that out. But, you know, I would probably still give it a skim and see, you know, what I'm hearing.
Monifa?
I think everyone kind of reiterated my thoughts
Okay.
on it, going back to presentation.
All right, can I just add one thing?
Okay.
I used to give away money in my previous life, read lots of applications. I had 2 words for everybody: simplicity and clarity. And they go
This
from
is
there.
true. But also I would say, from my point of view, when I get a CD that has the name of a band on it that I've never heard of before, and I cannot find the information about who's playing, where they're from, on the outside jacket, if I have to open it up, look inside the booklet, this is like, I'm all thumbs, you know, and it's, I don't like that. You know, if you have like a generic name for a group, common purpose or something like this. And it's like, and it's not, you know, the design is an abstract swirl, and I can't find out what it's about. It's just a lot of work. Also, I wish people would put when things are recorded. I would like to find that instead of having to look on the inside. Okay, well, I think that we've pretty much filled out our time, although we have not completed it. Enjoy JJA Radio at 2:30 in Concourse B, and again, thank you.